This is Tim.
This is Jason.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Jason in Portland, Oregon. And we're both having a heat wave in our respective locations. So
gross.
Yeah.
So gross. I hate it.
Yeah, it was 98 here yesterday.
Yeah, it's in the 90s here, and I had to take my leather jacket off. I just couldn't walk the dog in a black leather jacket.
Yeah.
That's how bad it is. That is, cry for me, Tim.
Yeah, if you can't wear a leather jacket, then that means it's really hot outside.
The leather jacket is half the scowl. Without the leather jacket, I just don't give off that same, mean Fonzie look that I want to project.
Okay, so this time, rather than a book that was submitted by a listener, Jason knew of this book by someone that you know.
I submitted this book.
Yes.
Well, I don't really. Well, I know Dan. Dan was a student of mine.
Dan, what's his last name? Tap. I don't know how to pronounce it.
I don't either.
Tappan. Tappan?
Dan Tappan. We'll call him Dan Tappan.
Sounds good.
And then we'll ignore him if he corrects us. So I teach undergraduate comic book script writing, but occasionally I will teach an adult class over Zoom, and that's a smaller group between 4 and 6 people. And I haven't done it this year yet because I've been too busy. But Dan was one of my adult students, and he worked on a piece that I thought was sensational. It's not this piece, though. He worked on a full-length graphic novel in my class that I thought was really, really good. And then he contacted me a few weeks ago and said, hey, I'm running a Kickstarter for my comic. And he wrote a completely different comic book that is also really, really good. And Dan, one of the horrors of teaching, and you teach, so you understand this. Every now and then I'll work with a student and I'll think, oh my God, this person is talented, has a vision, is more together than I am with 20 years more of experience than them. And Dan was that student. And, he's also not a bad looking dude. So of course I wanted to hate him. Son of a bitch. But no, Dan was a great student, and he elevated that class. So I was really happy to see him. As a teacher, it makes me really, really happy when former students send me their work. In fact, I got some mail today from another student that I'm going to open in a little bit from my former student, Lecco. So it just makes me feel good to know that I'm participating in the community and that. Younger students are getting the benefit of all the mistakes that I made, of which there are many, and then I'm continuing to make. But Dan has a Kickstarter, and it's running now, and it's called A Lungful of Brine.
Such an unsettling title.
Isn't that a great title? That's such a great, heavy metal title. You can just hear Ronnie James Dio belting that out. And it is a collection. It's an anthology of 4 or 5, nautical horror stories. And
all written by him with various artists contributing.
Different colorists. There's a different letterer at one point. I love horror anthologies. Where do you land on anthologies?
Well, yeah, horror is not necessarily my cup of tea. I've read some for Critiquing Comics, and some of them have been pretty good. But and anthologies, I don't know. When somebody hands me an anthology for Critiquing Comics, I say, "Oh no, it's so much work." But the stories are generally, anthologies in general, the stories can be interesting, but sometimes they can feel a little, I don't know, kind of
slight.
Yeah, and kind of you see kind of the typical kinds of stories, these when they're short like this. I don't know. Now this one, yeah, they're kind of creepy. Of course, like horror comics. In comics you can't really do jump scares, but you can do grotesque things. You can have creepy moods, and certainly these stories fit that. Although the direction some of them took kind of surprised me. And several of them also have a kind of environmental message. So, yeah, I mean, I thought this was a pretty good collection.
Yeah, horror anthologies, they're almost always built around the ending, right? Because they're such short pieces. You really have to, the ending has to leave you with some sort of twist or some sort of takeaway or moment that it lands on. And usually, anthology pieces, they really have one idea that they're really playing with in a really high-level way. Although I thought one of these stories in particular felt like it could have been broken out into its own like Blumhouse movie, and that was Whispers from the Deep. It's the one where there's a
with the orcas.
Talk about someone with the kid finds a conch shell.
Oh, that
and
one.
then
Okay.
There's a voice in the shell talking to him, and I thought that was, you could definitely spend $3 to $5 million on a micro budget horror film from Blumhouse and pack the theaters, at least for a hot weekend like this one. So yeah, usually they're just really one strong idea executed at a really high level, and you get in and you get out, and that's sort of what I really like about horror. Horror, I think, works best in shorter lengths. It's like comedy. You don't want to overstay your welcome. If you can establish that sort of vibe, you don't want to overdo it.
Leave them wanting more.
Yeah, and also with Nautical, I grew up on the water, and Dan did too. He's actually also from Long Island, a different part of Long Island than I'm from. So I'm just predispositioned to love this. I spent my childhood on a clam boat, which is not the sea; it's the sound, but still, I can smell the salt water just reading some of these pages, and it has a gorgeous, gorgeous cover. But yeah, so there are 5 stories in here. There is The Angler, which is about a drifter who comes to a small fishing town down on its luck. That one is drawn by Bob Bryce. And I thought that was a good, straightforward Tales from the Crypt introduction to what Dan and his team is capable of.
Yeah, that went pretty much where I expected it to go.
Yeah. And then there is Whispers from the Deep, which was illustrated by Renzo Podesta, which I thought was probably my favorite illustrator in this, because it was it almost felt like a storybook illustrator that was adapting their style to sequential storytelling. It was really pencil heavy, and I just really, really enjoyed it. The facial grammar, the eye work, the character work of the kid and the mom. That one's about a mom, and she works on the sea, and she brings home a seashell that may or may not be haunted. And again, I thought that one really had feature-length potential.
I did feel like I needed a little bit more there, like to kind of fill in exactly what was going on. I still had questions at the end.
I think horror should leave you with questions, but I agree. That one was like 19 or 20 pages, and I could even have gone for more of that one. And then there is Man and the Mermaid, which is sort of a almost like a monkey's paw type fable, and that one was illustrated by Mateus de Vicenza, and that one also just has a great sort of O. Henry ending. Which one? Well, let me get through all of them. And then there was also First Contact with Pod X, and that one was illustrated
that was
by,
the orcas.
Yeah, R.H. Stewart. And then the last one, which is about a fire on a oil refinery out at sea, was called Skin Graft, and that one was, God, I can't even read my own handwriting. I want to say it was Nicolette. No, I'm gonna mangle that. Let me get a real pronunciation. But overall, so professionally done.
And we should mention that you talked about the cover art. The artist there was Alex Cormack.
Right. Awesome piece. Okay, so Skin Graft was illustrated by Nicolas Nieto.
Okay.
All good illustrators, all definitely sort of in the indie vein. They all have a separate vision. I think that's also important in an anthology, is you want the artwork to look different in each piece to have like a slightly different look and vibe. And I just thought this was a really well done collection that I would not be surprised to see if it got picked up by a publisher. This looks like it would fit on the shelf next to other anthologies that I've bought at comic book stores.
Well, I was surprised, after, The Angler, like we said, is pretty classic Tales from the Crypt kind of progression. But then the other stories kind of went other directions. They weren't necessarily cut from that cloth. Like, one of them even had a happy ending. Like, what the?
Yeah, I was surprised. I don't know how I feel about happy endings, but it was unexpected. I think if you have this collection of stories, they're in the right order. Because if you had put the Angler last after the other ones,
that wouldn't work.
Yeah, it's the opening band. It's the primer for where you're going.
Yeah, just setting the stage, setting the tone.
Right, and I think you want to have an escalation. But yeah, there is a sort of a sci-fi horror bent to it. I mean, they're all based around the water and bad things happening around the water, the sea.
Well, if you were going to ask me which one I liked the most, I kind of have to go with The Man and the Mermaid because it's a metaphor, really. You know, the mermaid is symbolizing, you know, nature and the sea, and the man just keeps taking from her and doesn't give much back. Like, I love you, but you know, he's tearing her apart, really.
Yeah. I thought it was a love story. I didn't see that at all. No kidding. Again, just really, it's stronger than just what you're saying, like jump scares and Boo Wiggly and that kind of stuff. It is sort of saying something about our relationship to the ocean. Yeah. So when you talk about this having sort of a ecological bent, it's there, but it's also not beating you over the head with it.
Yeah, although at the end of the Pod X story, there is...
he does beat you over the head with it.
Yeah, he does kind of hit you over the head with it. By the way, environment, what does that page say?
It's not in this story.
Save the whales, save the sharks, save the ocean. What you just read is a work of fiction. Orca whales have never preyed on humans in the wild, but more importantly, apex predators like orcas and sharks play a vital role in maintaining healthy marine ecosystems. If you want to help conserve our oceans, please consider donating to any of the following organizations. And he lists 5 different places. So, yeah, that is a bit like, I got a concussion out of that. But he's right.
He's right. Okay, 2 things. It's not part of the story. It's like a text after the story.
It's after it says the end.
And I think, when Jaws was released, Peter Benchley's Jaws in 75, or I think that was 73, 74 in the book. The movie was a year or 2 later. Sharks were like hunted to near extinction. So I think, in 2022, you want to have a little bit of sensitivity around that thing. I feel like this could have gone at the end of the book, this little piece. But I think, definitely, we get it. Orcas are not bad, but in the service of stories, orcas are terrifying. They really are. And also, they're just prettier than sharks. Like, orcas are these like strong, majestic, beautiful creatures. Yeah. And then they're capable of great harm should they choose to. And then he has to make the point, they don't. I don't want to ruin everything for any of his future Kickstarter backers.
Trying to be careful here.
And because they're so short, the stories are so short that I think we should stay to a high level. But Skin Graft at the end, I think this was the one I probably like the least. Although I think the setup is the best. Having a fire and an oil tank, or these oil refineries, oil rig. Thank you. That's terrifying. I think it was a Marky Mark movie that took place in this environment. And I watched it because I love the water, and you're out there, and you have fire, you have water, you have all these things in between. It's terrifying. But this also plays on sort of what James Cameron does sometimes too, in things like The Abyss, where the ocean is so deep, there are things in there that we're still discovering, and we're sort of marrying, humanity to these secrets of the deep. And I think this story, Skin Graft, sort of has that intersection of body horror and James Cameron and not Lynch, but Cronenbergian themes, right?
Which artist would you say you like the best?
They all successfully do they capture the genre and the tone that they're in, but I really think the Whispers from the Deep, the Renzo Podesta piece, it's so, I don't see that kind of artwork in comics very often, and I wish I did. It's really illustrative, illustration heavy, and
it's actually even kind of cartoony.
Yeah, it's cartoony, but it's also really horrific. Like when it wants to be, it's scary.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's big. The artwork, the angles, the facial works. There's these tilts. There's this great shot of this kid running down the stairs and how the stairs almost disappear. I just feel like this artist really knew how to get a lot of mileage out of simple character interaction through shot
Some of the
selection.
panels actually remind me of Bill Watterson.
Yeah, but it's so unusual to see this in a comic book, and that's why I'm already like a little bit on edge. Like, is this supposed to be funny? Is it supposed to be terrifying? But I do think horror and comedy are sort of like there's similar impulses. Sometimes we laugh when we're scared. There's sort of I look at horror and comedy as kissing cousins. They're both a relief from the world around us. So yeah, I think that artist is someone that I would follow and see what they do next.
Yeah, I guess I'd have to agree. That's probably my favorite too, art-wise.
But also the Angler, I thought all of them none of them were bad at all. They were all of a high professional quality and not your traditional. I guess when I say traditional, I see so many artists that look like Jim Lee knockoffs. Like there's this whole like DC house style where everyone wants to draw like or at least there was like 10 years ago, where everyone is just encouraged to draw like Jim Lee. And Jim Lee is great, but if you can't get Jim Lee, do your own thing. Right? I'm not going to kick Jim Lee off a project, but I'm so tired of seeing artists where I can immediately see their influence, right? Whereas all these people seem like they're drawing from a swath of different experiences and exposure. And if they have an influence, it's not the first thing that they're showing me. So anytime I work with an artist, I'm always looking for someone who has their own style. We all have our own influences. We all have the things that got us into the game, that set us on the path, right? My early work, I'm sure I told you this was very similar to Albert Camus' The Stranger. I just thought The Stranger was great, and I wanted to put it in everything. And then I reread it recently, and I realized, oh, this book is just a handbook to be a stunted adolescent. But the path that put me on helped me find my own voice. So the compliment I want to give all the artists in this book is that I see that they have their own style. Also, the first contact with Pod X is with the orcas. Story-wise, it's also pretty straightforward. But I want to say the artist, R.H. Stewart, also has a really distinct and crisp style. And the way it's colored really takes advantage of the nautical setting.
Oh, yeah.
So that's also I also love when they incorporate the gutters in a page into the feeling of the book. So when they're underwater, all the Pod X pages, the gutters are black. The space between the panels is black. And then when they come out of the water, all the gutter spaces are white. And I just think it's a small touch, but it works really, really well.
Yeah, it does.
It may not be the first thing you're thinking of when you're composing a page, but the gutter is like your greatest tool in sequential storytelling. Like what the mind fills in that gutter, but also just the shape of the panel. Are the panels shaped the way that you feel about the work? I don't know. So I think overall, I'm just really, really impressed with Dan. I think what's frustrating to me is that my first book wasn't this good. Really, because I'm vain and I'll bring it back to me. As far as like your first effort, it's really, really strong. Dan has a really strong control over the narratives and stories. Some of them are maybe a little shorter than I would like them to be, but that's an anthology. It's better than staying too long. I'm a pacing queen. You know, a lot of writers will say, they pretty much all say, you should start with character. But in an anthology, there's only so much room. And for an anthology, you really want it to be plot. What's the plot? What's the twist? And get out. So you want them to be short. And for me as a writer, I am more interested in plot than I am in character.
Well, whenever I read an anthology, I kind of like, my feeling is like, okay, here we go. Let's dig in for a few hours. And I was surprised that, that this PDF is 93 pages. It was a quick read. So that's that's kind of a recommendation too, I guess. I mean, it doesn't feel like you're reading a long anthology, but it is 93 pages.
If you don't, there was a an anthology a couple of years ago. I want to say it was called Near Dark or After Dark or something dark.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a Kickstarter, and IDW picked it up. And it was so long, I don't know that I ever finished it. I was enjoying it, but if it's like fast food or candy or something, like it's like a treat, but you don't want to overdo it. So I think 5 stories is probably the perfect length for an anthology from one writer. Otherwise, it just starts to fall apart. I was looking at my shelf earlier at anthologies, and I was come in real hot, and I lose a little bit of steam because there isn't enough narrative where you're like, oh, I can't put this book down. The problem with an anthology is it gives you a lot of opportunities to put it down.
Mm-hmm.
Like every 8 or 20 pages. So I looked at this as a good, I think if you're thinking about making comics, this is a great model to emulate what Dan has done. Write 5 short little stories, kickstart it, get it out into the world. It's less than 100 pages. It's a manageable project. You know, even though things always go wrong, but there's really nothing that Dan will get this out into his backers. But if you're looking to collaborate, you know, starting with an 8 to 20 page story with another artist is a great way to start a project or a great way to start a career. You get to know artists and you get to know your craft and what works and what doesn't work. So many times when I talk to young writers, they have like this 300 page book that they want to start their career with. Mm-hmm. I'm like, you're never going to finish it. I'm sorry. Like it's very unlikely that you will ever finish it. And I know there are exceptions to that rule, right? My favorite thing is Monsters. Emil Ferris did a 900-page book for her first comic. But for most of us, start small. And if you can do an 8 to 20 pager, that's great. And then you can collect it. You can get it out in the world. Dan can send this to editors. Dan can send this to gatekeepers and be like, look what I did. Not what I would like to do. Look what I did. Mm-hmm. And has the experience of working now with 5 different artists. You know, and it took me, I don't know, probably 5 years to work with 5 different artists. So I just think if you're going to emulate, if you're thinking of making comics, this is a great way to get started.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to what Dan does next. So, you know, if you can, this is a good way to build an audience too. Do something small, simple, ship it to them, and build on it from there. Mm-hmm. Having Dan in my class, I know that he has longer stories within him. I just think this is a great first step. And honestly, I wish it was something that I wish I had done this back in 2003. Really.
Okay, I'm going to try to get this out as soon as I can. As we're recording this on, well, my time, it's June 26th. It says 10 days to go, and he hasn't reached his goal. So
he has reached his goal. I'm looking at it. He's.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm switching the numbers in my head. Yeah. The higher number is what he's made. Okay, I'm not sweating it then. Yeah,
this project is a go. It's definitely going to be made. It's definitely going to be out into the world. But you know, the more that you can support. It would be better to get in on the Kickstarter because you want those numbers. It's better for Dan to have it all within the Kickstarter than, you know, buying it from his site a year or 2 from now. He can just scale the numbers. Like I don't know what his print run is going to be, but it's better to know how much you're going to need up front. And he's got some cool stretch goals, and it's just a fun project, and it's got there's very little risk. We've read the book. It's done. All he has to do is print it and ship it to you. Mm-hmm. So do you recommend it? I'm recommending it. But
yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm an unbiased viewer here because I've met Dan.
Okay. I have not met Dan. I've had no contact with Dan. But yes, I do recommend it.
We have to keep our journalistic integrity here.
Right.
Well, I think that's saying a lot if you're not a big horror fan that you enjoyed this.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the craft that went into it. So it's a good piece of work if you're interested in horror or even interested in the environment. Even if you're not interested in horror, it'd be worth a look.
Yeah, and I would disagree about the jump scares. I think you can. They're harder to do, but if you incorporate the page turn,
yeah,
I do think you can surprise people.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this book had a few surprises within it. Also, his video is patently ridiculous. I applaud him, if nothing else, for that, having a really good video on his page. All right, Tim. Well, it's been a pleasure bragging about a former student who already has more talent than I do. Fucking jerk.
Okay. Yeah, listeners, if you'd like us to critique your comics, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read it and we'll talk about it. So thanks for listening, and thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you, Dan, for making an awesome comic.
Yeah.